Leading our conversation from the firm of Hollis Wright, Josh Wright. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Doing very well.
Did you have a good week?
I did have a good week.
Outstanding. Chris Reid has been on our show before with the Reid Law Firm. He does a great job whenever he's on the show. And we're going to be talking about something that is pretty near and dear to Alabamians, and that's sports law. And we're going to focus probably more specifically a little bit on football with spring football and things that have been going on over the last several weeks. So first of all, glad to have you on.
Yes, good to be back.
Excited to have you here.
Yeah.
How did you get into this area of the law? This is kind of a unique area of the law.
Well, my brother's a Major League Baseball agent, so he kind of prodded me and said, hey, you need to think about maybe getting your NFLPA license. And so I did, and it's worked out now. So I really enjoy it, and it's fun. I kind of do that on the side along with my general practice. But I've always enjoyed football, and kind of understanding the negotiation sports law side of it has made it a lot more interesting.
How do you go through the process of becoming a sports agent and kind of getting your PA license with the NFL?
You either have to have a master's or a law degree to even sit for the exam. That's only given, I believe, once a year in D.C. It costs about $3,000 just to take the exam, and then if you include you actually have to fly, the hotel, everything else, you're looking about $6,000-7,000, and you got to get insurance. So it's actually a pretty difficult process, and the exam's not easy. Other than the bar, it was the hardest exam I've taken in my life. So
I don't want any more tough exams in my life.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk just for a minute, because we know the NFL draft is coming up pretty quickly. How does a player become eligible even to be part of the NFL draft? Because I know that's not just a simple process of raising your hand saying, I want to be on an NFL team.
No, it's a little more complex than that. Normally it has to be 3 years after you've graduated from high school, and you basically have to give up your eligibility. And once you declare for the draft, that's it. And then there's a 3-day period during the NFL draft, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and then each team gets one slot per round. And so based on where you get picked is how much money you're going to get. And the perception is that a lot of players get these guaranteed dollars, and that's not accurate. Only very few people actually get guaranteed money in the NFL. Most of them will get paid if they play. So that's how it is for most of the people in the NFL, except for the people at the very top tier. Those people get paid no matter what.
So was there a change to the way first-year salaries work over the last 4 or 5 years? I feel like maybe it may have been even longer than that. At one point, there used to be these gigantic signing bonuses for first-year players, and it seemed like maybe that's their second contract now. Has it changed over the years, or how's it work now?
Well, the union has negotiated some very good deals for certain players. So if you're in the first or second round, you're going to get some pretty great signing bonuses. But it's really not that much when it gets to the lower rounds. It really is not as much as the perception would have you believe. So I think it's gotten better. But again, the overwhelming majority of people in the NFL are only going to get paid if they play football.
So there are practice squads, and then there are actual roster teams. Are the practice squad players, or those individuals, I know they're not rostered on an actual team, are they compensated by the NFL also?
Yes. Now, the practice squad players are making maybe a fifth of what someone on an NFL team or the minimum would be. So the reason you get on a practice squad is because if there's injuries or people that are moving out of a slot, then maybe you get to play as a starter on some of those games. But a practice squad player may make $80,000 to $100,000 a year, maybe a little bit more than that, just depending on how long they're on the squad.
Average player for the NFL, salary-wise?
I think the average in 2015 was about $850,000. Again, the perception is so much higher that because we just think about the star athletes, but it really isn't as high as people would have you believe. So it's around $850,000, $900,000, and that's sort of the median range.
It's tough to make it on $800,000-900,000.
Yeah, no, it is. It can be very, very difficult. I feel bad for those guys.
we love the questions we get. Would love to have you join our conversation. A question we got here that we can probably expect. How many first-round draft picks are going to come from the state of Alabama this year, do you think?
We might have a few. Jonathan Allen looks like he's good. That's the one that's going to be the highest. Some people predict he's going to go in the top 10. The Panthers are looking at him pretty seriously.
Right.
We also see You got Cam Robinson, O.J. Howard, Marlon Humphrey, Reuben Foster. So it really will depend. So we may have two of those go in the first round. But Alabama usually does really well in the draft. Alabama and LSU have dominated. So I think this is going to be a great year. We have some great players.
And I think the record is like 6. I think Miami at one point had 6 first-round draft picks. How impressive is that?
Oh, it's
Off of
unbelievable.
one team, 6 first-round draft picks, and folks talking about maybe at one point Alabama might do that, but that is hard to do.
No, it's very difficult when you think about it because it's 32 people, and you got to think of all the college teams and everybody. So to have 1 is very impressive, but to have like 2 or 3, that's amazing. But 6, I mean, that's hard to get to.
Yeah, Chris, talk about, you mentioned earlier that you've got to be 3 years out of high school. I know many years ago there was the Maurice Claret lawsuit that addressed some of these issues, because I know there's some legal implications that have played into the NFL and the way it works. Does that mean necessarily that you've got to be 3 years out of high school in college at the time you leave, or can you be 3 years out of high school, not go to college, and then still be prepared and get on an NFL team? How does that kind of work?
I mean, I think practically it's going to be very difficult for you to go to the NFL unless you just come from a college team. But the rule is 3 years out. Now, there might be some slight exceptions to that rule, but generally speaking, you're not going to see people that are going to go unless they've played for 2 years at least. But if someone's just blown up and amazing, then yeah, they can. Their junior year, they could completely go to the NFL.
And so, why do you think it is the junior year compared to like basketball, for example? I know they now allow a freshman to complete his freshman year in college and then go straight to the NBA. Why is it a couple extra years? I mean, is it a safety issue, you think?
No. It's a money issue. That's complete, because you got to think, like, college football makes so much money every year, and if players were to do 1 year on and then go to the NFL, there would be so much loss in revenues for the school. So I think the NFL and the NCAA work something out where they could keep their best players for at least 3 years, and then after that they can go. But, I mean, if there was a safety issue, it would probably be better if they went a little earlier, because a lot of people will play in college, get injured, and never be able to play in the NFL because they got injured to such a degree they could not succeed in the NFL.
So that's why we bring this guy on, because, I mean, he's honest with us, which is good. I would have thought it's either a safety or a money issue or both, right?
It comes down to the dot.
Hey, when we get back, I want to talk a little bit about a topic that I know people think about, and that is NFL players. What is their success rate of being able to hold their wealth over a long period of time? Kind of on average. We'll talk about bankruptcy and some of the other things coming up.
That sounds good. We're stepping aside our first break. As we do so, a reminder, we'd love to have you join our conversation. Ways that you can do so right there on your screen. Also, Facebook as well as Twitter. You'll find Hollis right there. Just search the term Hollis Wright. You'll find him on Facebook, and on Twitter it is Hollis_Wright. Stay tuned. More of The Attorneys coming right up. Welcome back into The Attorneys, the conversation tonight on sports law. Would love to have your question. You can pass that along to us, the information there at the bottom of your screen. Also, any question you have, if you're looking for some legal advice, opportunities from the firm of Hollis Wright, standing by to speak with you right now, here with Josh Wright and Chris Reid of the Reid Law Firm, talking sports law.
So, you know, Chris, when we went to break, we were talking and just kind of going into the issue of some of these contracts. Talk with us about kind of the success rate of these NFL players being able to maintain their wealth, kind of moving forward, and kind of what the history is there.
The NFL is doing a better job than they have done. I think the stat is somewhere around 70–80% of NFL players 5 years after their last year are in severe financial distress. So it's not great. The problem is people often live based up to what they're making, but the average NFL player is only going to play for maybe 4 or 5 years. And so they're living at that level of making $1 million a year, but they're only making that for a few years. So a lot of the times we don't train these people, and they're 22 to 26-year-old kids whenever they're in the NFL, so they're not necessarily equipped to make great financial decisions.
So it sounds like that's something the NFL has worked on. Like, for example, I know we see shows on television related to the initial tryouts and the NFL draft, and they talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'm assuming they've got financial planners and those types of things that you see to try and help these players along.
The NFL really has done a much better job in the last few years. Now, for me to even make a recommendation to a client, a player of mine, it has to be somebody that is NFLPA certified financial advisor. There's a lot of bad actors that got involved 10, 20 years ago, and so the NFL has really cleaned that up. But you can't force somebody to make good financial decisions, and therefore the NFL is limited to how much they can help. But they do put on a lot of these programs for the new players about how to invest, setting aside money, but again, not everyone heeds the advice they're given.
So how do agents work in general with relationship to these players, and when do they have the ability to start communicating with these players under the rules? How does all that process work?
It's very regulated. Now, for me, I won't even have a discussion with someone until they've declared eligibility. So generally speaking, you have to wait until that is. Now it depends on how you're doing it. Sometimes if you go in through the school they're at, you kind of have to register there. You'll have to also register with the Secretary of State if you want to talk to somebody in that specific state. So the process is very rigorous to even have a conversation. And so if you don't follow it exactly, you can lose your license, and that'll hurt your reputation, so you won't be able to recruit players going forward.
And so over the years, it sounds like those rules have gotten a lot more strict with agents trying to prevent them from having communications, providing financial resources early.
Yes, they've actually, in the last few years, they've doubled some penalties for violations. They've increased suspensions. So the NFL is not messing around with that anymore. And to think of the damage that can do if an agent and a player violate rules, I mean, that can mess up a team. I mean, everyone remembers what happened to Alabama about 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So they really don't want any issues coming up with that, but they have done a lot better job regulating that, so you haven't seen as many violations as you saw maybe 10, 15 years ago.
And just talk generally about what's the courting process, for example, when somebody does declare eligibility, or after they've declared eligibility, agents are starting to communicate with them. How do the agents market themselves? How does that process work?
Normally you get introduced by a mutual connection, like somebody that knows that player, and hey, I have a friend, he's an agent. And then the agent will go meet the person face to face, talk about the benefits they can provide to the player. And then if the player says, hey, I want to use you, then they sign a contract. But the contracts aren't very long. They're only about 10 pages, and they're very standard. And the most that we can make off of a player is 3% per year. And so we don't get paid as much money as people perceive. Now, we can make a lot of money when it comes to endorsement deals, then we can take a much higher percentage. But when it comes to the actual amount of money you get from the player, you're only taking 3%, and many of the players you're signing, they may do well, or they may blow out very quickly. So you really need to get a good amount of volume before you're going to succeed in this business.
A fellow, you're talking about maybe not taking the best advice sometimes. Johnny Manziel is a question we've got here on him, who has made some tough decisions, questionable decisions, I would say. A question here about whether he is going to be signing with an NFL team this year.
I would have said no, but there has been some talk recently from New Orleans that they may want him to back up Drew Brees. But the condition for that is he's got to stay sober and he has to keep a low profile. It's kind of funny when I heard that. New Orleans is in the best place to stay sober,
Yeah. Or keep a low profile.
Or keep a low profile. So we'll see whether he can do that or not. But he definitely has the talent, the skill to succeed. It's just whether or not he has the willpower to make those good decisions. So I'd like to think that he could play for the NFL and succeed, but that's going to be up to him.
He was so great to watch in college,
He
too.
was
I would
amazing.
love to see him get it together and be able to actually contribute. I know we're getting ready to go to break, but one of the things I want to talk about when we get back that I think is important is kind of the length of time that these players are in the NFL and how short that time frame actually is.
Yeah, much shorter than you would think. All right, our final break of the evening. As we head to break, a reminder, time for you to join the conversation. Would love to have you do so. That information you see there. Also, attorneys standing by live right now to speak with you. So take advantage of that opportunity as well. More of the attorneys coming right up. Welcome back into the attorney's. Time is flying. If you want to join the conversation, I encourage you to do so. Just a few minutes remaining in our conversation tonight. Josh.
So when we went to break, we were kind of talking through some of these contract issues, and I just saw in that firm fact how some of the contracts themselves work. What is the average time frame that somebody is actually in the NFL? Because I know it's a lot shorter than people would realize.
Well, it depends on how. They say it's 3 years, but if you actually make it to an opening day, you're on the draft, the average is 6 years, and if you're one of the first round players, it's about 9 years. So it really does depend on where you're ranked and where you start, but it certainly isn't as long as you think. And if you talk to players, they often think they're going to be there much longer than they actually are. And some of that depends on what position they're playing.
Yeah, and so the players you hear that have played the quarterback position or have kicked or have played a certain offensive line position that have been in the league for 16 years, 15, 14 years, that's an anomaly.
Yes, even in those positions, those are anomalies. Now, kickers generally are going to stay longer because they're less likely to get hit. But even quarterbacks, they're not generally going to stay as long as the perception is.
So the way, and I get from the firm fact the importance of negotiating these contracts. A lot of times, somebody may only have a single contract or a one renewal after that. I mean, it sounds like that's why those contracts are so important.
Yes, and like we talked about earlier, if you're a very high-ranking player, you get that guaranteed money, which means no matter what happens, you're going to get paid. But like we also said, most people don't get those. And the contracts generally are only for a few years, especially the first contract that someone's going to sign, and they're limited. So it really does take someone who knows how to negotiate to get a good deal for their player. But the teams really are not going to want to give much money unless they have somebody that's performing at a high level.
Welcome back into the attorney's. Time is flying. If you want to join the conversation, I encourage you to do so. Just a few minutes remaining in our conversation tonight. Josh.
So when we went to break, we were kind of talking through some of these contract issues, and I just saw in that firm fact how some of the contracts themselves work. What is the average time frame that somebody is actually in the NFL? Because I know it's a lot shorter than people would realize.
Well, it depends on how. They say it's 3 years, but if you actually make it to an opening day, you're on the draft, the average is 6 years, and if you're one of the first round players, it's about 9 years. So it really does depend on where you're ranked and where you start, but it certainly isn't as long as you think. And if you talk to players, they often think they're going to be there much longer than they actually are. And some of that depends on what position they're playing.
Yeah, and so the players you hear that have played the quarterback position or have kicked or have played a certain offensive line position that have been in the league for 16 years, 15, 14 years, that's an anomaly.
Yes, even in those positions, those are anomalies. Now, kickers generally are going to stay longer because they're less likely to get hit. But even quarterbacks, they're not generally going to stay as long as the perception is.
So the way, I mean, and I get from the firm fact the importance of negotiating these contracts. A lot of times, somebody may only have a single contract or a one renewal after that. I mean, it sounds like that's why those contracts are so important.
Yes, and like we talked about earlier, if you're a very high-ranking player, you get that guaranteed money, which means no matter what happens, you're going to get paid. But like we also said, most people don't get those. And the contracts generally are only for a few years, especially the first contract that someone's going to sign, and they're limited. So it really does take someone who knows how to negotiate to get a good deal for their player. But the teams really are not going to want to give much money unless they have somebody that's performing at a high level.